Claire Dawson, the CEO of Horizon Technologies, stood in the bustling terminal of JFK International, feeling the excitement and pressure of the most important trip of her career. She was on her way to Singapore for the Global Tech Summit, where she would deliver a keynote speech that could secure a $500 million investment for her company. As the founder of one of the leading tech companies in America, she was used to the elite treatment that came with flying first class. Her journey had been smooth up until this point, but as she approached the SkyLine Airlines check-in desk, the first sign of trouble appeared. A young agent, a woman named Carla, barely glanced up as Claire walked to the first-class counter. "Economy check-in is that way, ma'am," Carla said dismissively, pointing toward a long line of travelers. Claire paused, her mind processing the interaction. "I'm flying first class to Singapore," she responded, holding out her phone to show her digital boarding pass. Carla gave her a quick once-over, then barely looked at the phone before repeating, "Economy check-in is that way." She spoke with an air of finality, clearly uninterested in Claire's assertion. Claire's pulse quickened, but she remained calm. "Could you please check again?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. Carla's eyes narrowed as she took the phone from Claire, examining the digital boarding pass as though it were a foreign object. "I'll need to verify this," she muttered, her voice tinged with suspicion. Claire could feel the weight of the situation beginning to settle in. In her years of flying, she'd never experienced anything like this. She was a seasoned businesswoman, accustomed to first-class treatment, but here she was, being treated as if her place in the premium cabin was somehow questionable. She'd flown SkyLine Airlines countless times, and never had she encountered such blatant disrespect. A few moments later, a senior agent approached, a man named Greg, his name tag clearly visible. "Is there a problem here?" he asked Carla, his tone not exactly friendly, but more neutral than Claire had expected. "She says she has a first-class ticket," Carla replied, her voice still carrying a note of disbelief. Greg eyed Claire from head to toe, his gaze lingering just a second too long. "Ma'am, are you aware that first-class tickets on international flights are very expensive?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Claire's composure didn't falter, but inside a fire began to build. She had been a tech mogul for over a decade, building a billion-dollar company from the ground up. She was used to having the best of everything: flight upgrades, premium service, and a seat at the table. But today, it seemed, SkyLine Airlines had decided she didn't belong in that world. "I know exactly how much first-class tickets cost," Claire said smoothly, her voice unwavering, "and I am fully aware that I am in seat 2A on this flight." Greg didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took her boarding pass from her hand and scrutinized it further, as if expecting some error to appear. His eyes darted to the screen behind him, and Claire could tell that the wheels were turning in his mind. The skepticism was palpable. After a few long moments, Greg turned toward a colleague, whispering something about needing to verify her ticket. He didn't even address Claire directly. She stood there, feeling the weight of the situation settle around her, an uncomfortable tension in the air. Just then, a security guard appeared, a large man who towered over Claire. His eyes scanned her quickly before locking onto her. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside," he said gruffly, his hand closing around her arm before she could respond. "Excuse me," Claire said, her voice firm. "I don't need to be escorted anywhere. This is a mistake." The guard's grip tightened slightly, and Claire felt the familiar sting of being dismissed and treated as if she were somehow less important. People in the terminal were starting to notice. Some passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Others pulled out their phones to record the scene, unsure of what was happening. The tension mounted. Claire was being treated like a criminal simply because of her appearance. A few seconds later, another security guard arrived, his eyes scanning the scene. "Is everything okay?" the new guard asked Greg, his tone not as authoritative as Claire would have liked. "This woman is claiming she has a first-class ticket," Greg replied, still with that air of disbelief. "But I'm not so sure." As the chaos grew, something unexpected happened. The massive electronic boards that lined the terminal flickered. The departure boards went completely dark, causing a wave of confusion to ripple through the crowd. Overhead, the PA system sputtered to a stop, mid-announcement. Passengers froze, their eyes darting toward the screens, which had all gone black. The hum of the terminal's usual bustle was replaced by nervous murmurs and confusion. For a moment, Claire wondered if it was some sort of cosmic coincidence, a glitch in the system. But as the minutes ticked by and the staff remained visibly confused, she began to suspect something much more sinister. SkyLine Airlines had a lot to answer for, and it wasn't just about a boarding pass anymore. Claire Dawson's journey had been anything but easy. Growing up in a modest, working-class neighborhood in Chicago, she had seen firsthand how the world could be unforgiving to those without privilege. Her mother, a single parent, worked 2 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. The community Claire grew up in was one where dreams of success often seemed far out of reach, and yet Claire never let that stop her. She was determined to make a name for herself in a world that didn't seem built for people like her. At the age of 16, while other teenagers spent their weekends at the mall, Claire spent hers taking apart broken electronics she'd found at local pawn shops. She'd buy old computers for pennies on the dollar, fix them up, and sell them for a small profit. In her spare time, she taught herself to code on a second-hand computer that her high school teacher had salvaged for her from a junk pile. What started as a hobby to escape the harsh realities of life soon became a way of survival. By 17, Claire had built up a reputation for fixing computers and teaching local small businesses how to make their operations more efficient. What started as a side hustle to help pay the rent grew into a full-fledged small business. Her skills didn't just keep her afloat, they helped her support her mother, who had worked tirelessly to provide for them both. Despite her growing success in tech, Claire's road to higher education was anything but easy. She applied to several prestigious universities with perfect SAT scores and top grades, but she was waitlisted at every school she applied to. Even when she did get accepted into Northwestern University on a partial scholarship, she had to work 2 part-time jobs while maintaining a full course load. There were days when she barely had time to sleep, let alone relax. But Claire didn't complain. She understood that hard work was the only way forward. By the time she graduated, her name was beginning to gain recognition in tech circles, but that didn't mean the industry was ready to accept her. After college, Claire landed her first job at a tech startup. She was excited, eager to prove herself, but it didn't take long for her to see the harsh realities of the corporate world. While she worked tirelessly to build innovative software that saved the company millions, her male colleagues, most of whom were white, received the credit. Her boss took credit for the software she had developed, and when she tried to voice her frustration, she was labeled as difficult and not a team player. For most people, these setbacks would have been crushing, but not Claire. Instead of accepting the unfairness of the system, she made a choice. She would not fight against a system that wasn't designed for her success. She would create her own system. At the age of 28, she mortgaged everything she had, her apartment, her car, her savings, and launched Horizon Technologies, a startup focused on providing innovative tech solutions to businesses. It wasn't easy. The early days of Horizon Tech were tough. Claire didn't pay herself a salary for the first 2 years. She lived on ramen noodles and canned tuna, while her company struggled to find its footing. But Claire believed in her vision, and that belief eventually paid off. Her company grew, attracting talented engineers and developers who believed in her mission. By the time Claire turned 35, Horizon Technologies had expanded internationally, employing over 3,000 people and reporting annual profits of more than $1 billion. Despite her success, Claire remained grounded. She had seen too much struggle to forget where she came from. As a woman of color in a male-dominated, predominantly white industry, Claire understood the power of resilience. She didn't let the challenges of the past hold her back. Instead, they fueled her desire to change the industry for the better. Horizon Tech wasn't just another successful startup. It was a beacon for other underrepresented individuals who dreamed of making it in the tech world. Now at the age of 40, Claire had become one of the most influential CEOs in America. She wasn't just an entrepreneur, she was a force of nature, changing the way people thought about technology and diversity in the workplace. But despite her enormous success, she knew that this trip to Singapore was pivotal for the future of her company. She had worked tirelessly for the opportunity to speak at the Global Tech Summit, and this was her moment to secure the investment that would fund Horizon Tech's most ambitious project to date, a platform that could revolutionize the global supply chain industry. Claire was preparing to board her flight to Singapore with the weight of her company's future on her shoulders. She wasn't just flying to give a speech, she was flying to secure Horizon Tech's place as a leader in the global tech market. Everything hinged on this moment, but as she walked through the terminal toward Gate 37B, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that the events unfolding were about to change her life and the entire airline industry forever. By the time Claire reached Gate 37B, the air was thick with frustration and confusion. The terminal had grown increasingly chaotic after the system's glitch that shut down the flight information boards. People in the boarding line were looking around, murmuring to each other, unsure of what was happening. Claire's mind was focused solely on getting through this, maintaining her composure, and ensuring that nothing would derail her plan. She had endured the rude check-in experience and the unnecessary security checks, but she wasn't going to let this minor inconvenience stop her. She had a speech to give in front of the world's most influential investors, and her company's future depended on this trip. As Claire approached the boarding lane for first-class passengers, she noticed the gate agent, a woman named Emily, eyeing her suspiciously. The agent stood near the podium, scanning boarding passes with a blank expression. "Excuse me, ma'am," Emily said, her tone cold, her eyes darting to the screen in front of her, as if expecting to find something out of place. "This lane is for first-class passengers only. You'll need to show me your boarding pass again." Claire took a deep breath, her patience already worn thin by the earlier encounter. She held up her phone without saying a word, her boarding pass clearly visible. Emily glanced at it, frowning, and then waved her hand dismissively. "I'm going to need to double-check this," Emily muttered, more to herself than to Claire, as she swiped the pass across the scanner. The scanner beeped, confirming the validity of the ticket, but Emily's expression didn't change. For a split second, Claire considered confronting the agent. She had a first-class seat, she had every right to board, and yet this woman was acting as if Claire's presence in that lane was somehow a mistake. But she held her tongue, knowing that arguing would only escalate things. Emily's finger hovered over the phone as she stared at the screen, her brow furrowing. Claire could feel the weight of her gaze. It was a silent challenge, as if the agent didn't believe Claire belonged in first class. It wasn't just an oversight or a mistake. It was something deeper, something far more insidious. Claire's heart pounded in her chest, and yet she remained calm. This wasn't the first time she had dealt with subtle discrimination in a professional setting, but it was the first time she had felt so publicly marginalized. Seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. The tension in the air grew thicker as more passengers began to notice the interaction. A few murmured to each other, some watching with curiosity, others with suspicion. Claire stood there composed, but her mind was racing. She knew she had to keep it together. The last thing she wanted was to play into the stereotype of the angry black woman that so many people expected her to be. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I need to speak to a supervisor," Emily said finally, her voice clipped. Claire felt a pang of frustration, but she nodded silently. Moments later, a man approached, his face set in a permanent scowl. He was in his 50s, his graying hair neatly combed, and his suit looked expensive. Perhaps a little too expensive for someone in customer service. His name tag read Michael Collins. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice cold and formal. Claire kept her gaze steady. "I'm being asked to step aside while other first-class passengers are allowed to board. I've shown my boarding pass multiple times." Michael took the boarding pass from Emily's hand, and for a moment he scrutinized it with the same skepticism Claire had encountered earlier. He glanced at Claire, then back at the boarding pass, as though expecting some discrepancy to appear out of nowhere. "Ma'am," he said slowly, with a hint of condescension, "do you understand that first-class tickets are very expensive? Are you sure you're supposed to be here?" The words hit Claire like a slap. The implication was clear. She didn't look like someone who belonged in first class. It wasn't just about the ticket, it was about her, about the assumptions people had when they looked at her. "I'm aware of the cost," Claire replied, her voice steady, though the anger burned behind her words. "And I'm sure I'm supposed to be here. I paid for my ticket and I've been a loyal customer of SkyLine Airlines for years." Michael didn't respond right away. He looked up at her as if trying to decide whether or not he believed her. And for a brief moment, Claire wondered if he was going to ask her for more identification or some kind of proof beyond the ticket itself. Instead, Michael signaled to another security guard, a tall man with a sharp uniform and a no-nonsense demeanor. The guard's eyes locked onto Claire, his posture tense. He stepped forward, placing his hand on her arm before she could react. "Ma'am, we're going to have to ask you to step aside for further verification," the security guard said, his voice firm. Claire's blood ran cold, but she didn't flinch. She knew exactly what was happening now. This wasn't just a mistake. It was an orchestrated effort to delay her, to challenge her place in first class. She was being singled out not because of any mistake, but because of who she was. "I'm not moving," Claire said firmly, meeting the guard's gaze. "I have every right to board this flight. If you refuse to let me through, I will be forced to escalate this further." As the minutes passed, more people gathered around, their eyes flicking nervously between Claire and the airline staff. It was at that moment that Claire realized something monumental was happening. This wasn't just a dispute over a boarding pass. It was an embodiment of everything she had fought against her entire life: systemic racism and the unspoken barriers that so many people like her had to overcome. Before Claire could say anything more, a new voice interrupted the tension. "Is there a problem here?" The voice was calm, controlled, and filled with authority. Claire looked up to see a tall man approaching, his sharp suit and confident posture immediately signaling his status. He was the CEO of SkyLine Airlines, Nathan Green, and he was watching the situation unfold with a mix of curiosity and concern. As Nathan Green, the CEO of SkyLine Airlines, approached the gate, Claire could see the familiar air of entitlement in his stride. His tailored suit and perfectly groomed appearance screamed authority, though not necessarily the kind of authority that came from earning respect. He was an heir to SkyLine's legacy, someone who had inherited his position rather than fought for it. Nathan's eyes scanned the scene quickly, taking in the escalating tension between Claire and the airline staff. His sharp gaze flickered briefly over Claire before settling on his employees, whose discomfort was palpable. "What's going on here?" Nathan's voice rang out in the otherwise tense silence, and the gate agents visibly stiffened at the sound. "This woman is claiming she has a first-class ticket," Michael Collins, the senior agent, began, his voice strained. "But we've had some issues verifying her identity and her booking." The way Michael said "claiming" struck Claire like a cold dagger. It wasn't just about a boarding pass anymore. It was about her identity, her very right to occupy the space she was in. This was a moment that Claire had seen countless times before, where the very notion of her belonging in certain spaces was questioned. Claire's eyes met Nathan's, her gaze unyielding. "I've been nothing but polite, but this has gone far enough," she said, her voice calm but with an underlying steel. "I'm Claire Dawson. I'm the CEO of Horizon Technologies, and I own 28% of SkyLine Airlines." A subtle shift passed over Nathan's face, something between surprise and discomfort. He blinked, his jaw tightening, but he said nothing at first. The gate agents, on the other hand, exchanged confused glances, unsure of what to do with this new information. Nathan finally spoke. "I wasn't aware of that," he said, a slight edge to his voice, though his outward demeanor remained composed. "But there's no need for drama, Ms. Dawson. We can sort this out without all the fuss." "No," Claire replied firmly. "There's no sorting out this time. You and your staff have been treating me like a second-class citizen for no reason other than the color of my skin, and I won't stand for it. You've embarrassed me and your company, and it's time to be held accountable." Nathan looked at her with a mix of frustration and annoyance, as if trying to dismiss her words. But Claire wasn't finished. She stepped forward, holding her phone with her boarding pass firmly displayed on the screen. "I'm here today for more than just a flight, Nathan," she said, her voice steady but forceful. "I'm here to attend the Global Tech Summit, where I'm the keynote speaker. I'm also here to make a recommendation that will shape the future of corporate travel." The mention of the Global Tech Summit caught Nathan's attention, but he remained silent. Claire could see the wheels turning in his mind. This wasn't just an inconvenience for her anymore. It was a threat to his company's future. She had something he wanted, and he knew it. "I don't think you understand the full extent of what's at stake here," Claire continued. "SkyLine Airlines isn't just another airline. I am personally evaluating your company as part of a multi-billion-dollar corporate contract, Horizon Technologies is working on a global travel initiative with a few of the world's largest tech companies, and we were considering partnering with SkyLine for all our international flights. That's $3 billion worth of business over the next 5 years. But after today, you can forget that. Nathan's eyes widened slightly as the weight of her words sank in. Wait, he began, trying to regain some composure. You're talking about a contract worth billions? Yes, Nathan, Claire replied, her voice firm and calm. I was going to give your airline the opportunity to serve our business for the next 5 years, but now after what I've witnessed, you can forget it. I'm pulling SkyLine off the table entirely. I'll make sure it's known that your company's culture is discriminatory and fails to treat clients and employees with dignity. Nathan's face paled, and Claire saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. The stakes had just gone from personal inconvenience to a catastrophic loss for SkyLine. If Claire followed through on her threat, SkyLine would lose a multi-billion-dollar deal that could very well determine its future. A few tense seconds passed before Nathan finally spoke again, his voice low and measured. This is unacceptable. We'll need to investigate this further, he said, his voice betraying the nervousness creeping in. Investigate all you want, Claire shot back. But while you're busy investigating, your company will continue to lose business. This isn't just about me, Nathan. It's about every person who has been overlooked, dismissed, and humiliated by your airline for no reason other than the way they look. It's about your corporate culture that has allowed this to go unchecked. The tension in the air was thick as more passengers began to gather around, drawn by the spectacle of a confrontation between a prominent CEO and the head of an airline. The murmurs grew louder, and Claire knew she had a chance to make this public. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the people who had been systematically oppressed, ignored, and silenced by corporate America. Nathan, clearly rattled by the revelation of Claire's influence, turned to Michael and the other staff members. Get her through, he said, his voice strained, and make sure this doesn't happen again. But Claire wasn't finished. I'll be taking my seat now, she said with a quiet but firm finality, and as she turned to walk toward the boarding lane, her heels clicking on the floor, the crowd parted for her. Her phone rang just as she stepped through the gate, and she picked it up without hesitation. Claire, came the voice of her chief strategy officer, Marcus Chen. The Singapore Sovereign Fund needs a decision from us by morning. They're waiting for us to choose an airline for our global corporate contract. What's the status? Claire's mind raced. This wasn't just a moment of personal frustration. It was a business opportunity, and SkyLine had just blown it. Tell them to hold, Claire said, glancing over her shoulder to see Nathan still standing at the gate, watching her every move. We're going with Singapore Airlines. SkyLine is off the table. The wheels were already in motion. As Claire made her way to her seat in the first-class cabin, she felt the weight of the moment settle over her. The flight attendants greeted her with polite smiles, but their expressions were tinged with the awkwardness of what had just unfolded at the gate. Claire sat down in her seat, her mind still racing, but now with a sense of clarity. She had made her point, and the ripples of her actions would be felt far beyond SkyLine Airlines. The announcement came over the PA system shortly after takeoff, a brief message from the captain regarding the flight's status. But Claire barely heard it. She was lost in thought, replaying the scene in her mind. She had faced discrimination at every turn in her career, but today, for the first time, she had stood firm and made the world see what had been hidden in plain sight for so long. Meanwhile, back at JFK, the aftermath of the confrontation at Gate 37B was still unfolding. The media had already caught wind of the incident, with several passengers recording the exchange between Claire and the SkyLine staff. The hashtag #SkyLine Reckoning quickly began to trend on social media. News outlets picked up the story, and the headlines were hard to ignore. CEO of Horizon Technologies exposes discriminatory practices at SkyLine Airlines. By the time Claire's flight reached cruising altitude, the pressure on SkyLine Airlines had already begun to mount. The airline's stock price dropped sharply, reflecting the growing public backlash. Nathan Green, who had once seemed so untouchable, was now facing the harsh consequences of his company's deep-rooted problems. At SkyLine's headquarters, a flurry of activity ensued. Nathan convened an emergency board meeting, his face pale and tight with anxiety. He knew that Claire's actions had set in motion something irreversible. The board members, who had once blindly followed Nathan's lead, now found themselves in damage control mode. They had no choice but to investigate the culture that had allowed such blatant discrimination to go unchecked. It wasn't long before the investigation turned up damning evidence. Employees had been documenting discriminatory incidents for months, and internal reports showed that SkyLine had a pattern of racially biased treatment toward passengers of color. The board members, including several of Nathan's closest allies, began to shift their stance. They understood now that the company couldn't survive without radical change. Within days, SkyLine Airlines announced sweeping reforms. Nathan Green was suspended, and an interim CEO was appointed from outside the company's current leadership. The new CEO, a woman named Isabel Martinez, was tasked with rebuilding the company's reputation and implementing policies that would ensure equal treatment for all passengers, regardless of their race or background. Claire watched the announcement from her hotel room in Singapore, the news flashing across her phone screen. It was a moment of quiet satisfaction, but also one of reflection. Her fight wasn't just about her. She had sparked something bigger. The airline industry was now facing a reckoning. Other airlines began to take notice. United Airlines announced a review of its customer service practices, while Delta and American Airlines unveiled new initiatives aimed at reducing bias in their own operations. In the months that followed, SkyLine Airlines struggled to regain its footing. The internal changes were slow, but the pressure from the public and the media never relented. It would take years for SkyLine to fully recover, and even then, its reputation would never quite be the same. As for Claire, her keynote at the Global Tech Summit was a resounding success. The Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund signed on to invest in Horizon Technologies, and her company's growth trajectory soared. But Claire knew that the real victory wasn't just in the deal she'd secured. It was in the quiet revolution she had sparked. She had taken a stand against prejudice and discrimination, and in doing so, she had changed the course of her industry forever. As she looked out over the skyline of Singapore, Claire felt a deep sense of purpose. Her company was growing, her influence was expanding, but more importantly, she had proven something far more important. Standing up for what's right, even in the face of adversity, could change the world. And the world, it seemed, was finally listening.